Hi, I'm Linda Harper. I never imagined I'd be telling a story like this, but here I am, sitting in my kitchen, thinking back to a moment that shook me to my core. I was 67, a widow for a few years, living quietly in the home I had shared with my late husband. I'd always thought of it as my sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe and enjoy the years I had worked so hard to build. But that sense of safety disappeared the day my daughter-in-law, Jessica, stood in my kitchen and made me feel like a stranger in my own home. She acted as if she owned the place, as if my decades of hard work and memories meant nothing. I remember the exact way she said it. It wasn't just words, it was the tone, the certainty. And in that instant, something inside me shifted. I couldn't believe my son Daniel just watched, silent. While his wife crossed a line I never thought anyone would. I felt a rush of anger, of disbelief, and yes, of fear. How had it come to this? I had always tried to be the mother, the guide, the one who supported them. Yet here I was, being told that my presence was optional. I wish I could say I reacted immediately, that I shouted or begged, but I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange calm. I noticed every detail of the kitchen, the refrigerator I had bought, the counters polished from years of care. I realized then that I needed to be smart. If they thought they could push me out, I would find a way to reclaim my space. But I had to understand what I was really up against first. Even as my heart pounded, I felt the stirrings of determination. I had lived a long life, made mistakes, learned from them, and loved deeply. I knew one thing for certain: I would not be erased or dismissed in my own home. And so, as I stood there, I decided to pay attention, to gather my thoughts, to observe every gesture, every word, every glance. Something told me this confrontation was only the beginning, and I needed to be ready for what was coming. It was in those first minutes, standing in my kitchen, that I understood a truth I would carry for the months to come. Sometimes the people closest to us can become the most dangerous, and sometimes the quietest person in the room, the one everyone underestimates, can become the one who changes everything. I never imagined my own family would teach me this lesson, but I was about to learn it the hard way. And as I looked at Jessica, standing there with such confidence, I couldn't help but wonder, how far would she go? And how much had my son truly seen? That thought lingered in my mind, even as I took a deep breath and prepared for the journey ahead. From that moment, everything changed, and what followed would test every ounce of patience, courage, and cleverness I didn't know I still had. Looking back, I realize how subtle the cracks in our family life had been from the very beginning. When Daniel lost his job at the accounting firm, I welcomed him and Jessica into my home, thinking it would be temporary, a few weeks or months, until he got back on his feet. I wanted to help my son, to offer comfort, to be the mother I had always tried to be. But temporary stretched into months, and the small gestures of respect and gratitude I had hoped for never materialized. Living with them, I began noticing the little things that didn't sit right. They didn't contribute much, never really helped around the house, and Jessica's part-time work at the salon seemed to disappear into expensive coffee runs and online shopping sprees. I reminded myself that everyone had their habits, their own lives. But still, the tension in my chest grew every time I opened the refrigerator and saw the remnants of groceries I had paid for vanish without acknowledgement. Daniel, my son, always tried to smooth things over, telling me I was being too critical, too sensitive. I wanted to believe him, to see that he truly understood me. But deep down, I sensed that he had started tuning out my discomfort, thinking I would simply accept everything for the sake of peace. Peace, I realized, was no longer an option if it meant losing my dignity. Jessica's attitude became more daring with every passing week. She criticized my cooking, my way of arranging the house, even the routines I had lived by for decades. I remembered the moment that really drove the point home when she suggested, without shame, that if I didn't like living with them, I could just leave. That was the first time I truly felt the weight of betrayal. The home I had cherished suddenly felt foreign, and the woman standing in front of me acted as though she had a claim to everything I had built. I found myself replaying small memories, moments I had thought were simple gestures of kindness, helping Daniel fill out forms, cooking his favorite meals, listening when he worried about job applications. All of it seemed to have been forgotten, dismissed. And yet, despite the hurt, I felt a quiet resolve settling in. I realized that understanding their motivations might give me the clarity I needed to respond wisely, rather than reacting out of anger alone. I began watching, noticing patterns, remembering every detail. The way Jessica checked her phone constantly, the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the subtle ways Daniel hesitated when she acted boldly. Every glance, every silence, spoke volumes. I started keeping mental notes, preparing myself for the moment I might have to act, though I wasn't yet sure what that would look like. And so, as the days turned into weeks, I learned to carry both empathy and suspicion together. I reminded myself that my love for my son didn't have to blind me to reality. Sometimes, the people we care for most can make choices that hurt us, not out of malice, but because they are caught in their own desires and habits. And I knew one day I would have to face the truth of what was really happening under my roof, and how far I would be willing to go to protect myself and my home. The tension had been quietly building for months, and I had learned to feel it in my bones, preparing me for the first real test of courage that was about to come. The tension in my home reached a point where it was impossible to ignore. I began noticing the little signs that something was more than just carelessness or laziness. Groceries disappearing without acknowledgement, bills left unpaid, and Jessica's constant scrolling through her phone while my kitchen, my own sanctuary, felt less and less like mine. I realized that I was no longer a guest in my own home. I was being taken for granted, tested, even pushed toward a corner. I remember the day I finally reached my breaking point. Jessica's words, the ones about leaving if I didn't like living with them, had settled in my mind like a weight I could no longer carry quietly. That morning, I went to the guest room, not to pack my own things, but to start moving hers into her largest suitcase. I felt a strange clarity as I handled her expensive clothes, her jewelry, the designer bags she treated as casually as I treated dusting. I knew in my heart that this was not about revenge. It was about asserting the simple truth that this was my house, and my patience had limits. Daniel watched, hesitant, unsure of what to do. He had always been my son, the one I trusted to see reason, but now he seemed torn between his wife and the mother who had loved and guided him all these years. I realized then how easily people can be blinded by loyalty or fear of conflict, and how important it is to stand firm when your values and your safety are on the line. Jessica reacted predictably, calling the police and fabricating a story about my mental state. I had anticipated some sort of confrontation, but the calm I felt surprised even me. I knew that keeping my composure would be my strongest weapon. I thought about every detail, every gesture, and remembered every slight that had led to this moment. The realization hit me, this was not spontaneous. This was a plan, and I had to approach it with strategy rather than emotion. When the so-called psychiatrist arrived, someone Jessica had clearly arranged to validate her story. I saw the full picture of the danger I faced. This was no longer just about disrespect in my own home. This was an attempt to strip me of control, to question my competence, to manipulate my son into doubting me. It was infuriating, terrifying, and yet, strangely, empowering, because finally I understood the magnitude of what I was up against. I began to plan quietly, methodically. I thought about every tool I could use, every ally I could call upon. I knew I needed proof, and I needed to remain calm. My mind raced with scenarios and contingencies, each more intricate than the last. But I felt a sense of purpose rising from the anxiety. For the first time in months, I was not just reacting. I was preparing to act, to protect what was mine, and to reclaim my sense of dignity. As I walked through the house that day, seeing my possessions mingled with their belongings, I realized something important. The people who underestimate you become careless, and the calmest person in the room often has the clearest vision. I made a promise to myself that no matter what tactics they tried, I would stay alert, patient, and ready. And in that moment, I began to feel the first stirrings of confidence that would carry me through the challenges that were yet to come. I knew then that the coming days would test me in ways I could not yet fully see, and that the real battle was just beginning. But for the first time, I also felt certain that I could face it and that I would emerge stronger than I had ever imagined. The moment everything changed was the moment I realized that Jessica's behavior wasn't just selfishness or ignorance, it was deliberate, calculated, and part of a much larger scheme. I began piecing together patterns that had seemed insignificant at first. The way she had manipulated Daniel, how she had brought in the so-called psychiatrist, how her every move was designed to make me doubt my own memory and judgment. It hit me that I had been targeted, carefully, and for a reason. I remember feeling a chill when I discovered the truth about her past. She had married older men before, men who had wealth, and each time their deaths left her with access to their assets. It was shocking, almost unbelievable, but the evidence made it undeniable. And now, she had set her sights on me. The realization was terrifying, yet it sparked a determination I hadn't felt in years. I could no longer be passive. I knew I had to act, but carefully. I contacted my attorney, Margaret Chen, and we devised a plan that was both legal and precise. We involved the authorities discreetly, gathering evidence, documenting every interaction, every suspicious call, and every unusual visit. It was meticulous work, but I felt a growing sense of control. For the first time since this had started, I was no longer at the mercy of fear. I was preparing to reclaim my life. When Jessica and the fake psychiatrist arrived for what they thought would be another act of intimidation, I was ready. I stayed calm, observed their every movement, and allowed the conversation to unfold under my terms. Every lie they tried to present, every hint of manipulation, only strengthened my resolve. I realized that their confidence depended on my ignorance, and now that I was fully aware, they had no power over me. It was in those hours that I truly felt the transformation. I was no longer the vulnerable widow who had welcomed them into her home. out of love for her son. I had become a strategist, a protector of not just my own life and assets, but potentially of others who might fall victim to their schemes. I remembered the people Jessica had hurt in the past, the pattern of deceit, and the quiet suffering of those who had not yet realized the danger around them. That knowledge fueled my courage. The turning point came when I confronted the reality of what was at stake. I understood that by standing firm, documenting everything, and engaging the right authorities, I could not only protect myself, but expose a larger network of fraud. I felt a surge of empowerment, the kind that comes from knowing that fear no longer dictates your actions. I had the proof. I had the strategy. And I had the will to see it through. As I reflected on these events, I recognized the deeper lesson hidden within the chaos. Sometimes the people we trust most can become our greatest threat. But in the process of defending ourselves, we discover strengths we never knew we had. I felt a quiet satisfaction as the first steps of justice began to unfold. And I knew that the coming days would bring both challenges and closure. But this time, I was ready. Standing there, in the heart of my home, I felt a profound shift. The fear and anger were still present, but they were tempered by clarity and purpose. I was no longer reacting to events. I was shaping them. And in that moment, I realized that true power comes not from force, but from understanding, preparation, and unwavering courage. The weeks ahead would require patience and vigilance. But I knew one thing: I had taken the first decisive steps to reclaim my life. And nothing, not even the people I had once loved most, could take that away from me. After the initial confrontation, I began to see the results of careful planning and patience. The authorities, my attorney, and I had set a course that would expose Jessica and her accomplices. I watched as the first pieces of evidence fell into place, each one confirming the suspicions I had harbored for months. There was a deep sense of satisfaction in knowing that my attention to detail, my quiet observations, and my insistence on staying calm were finally paying off. I remember the moment Daniel began to see the truth. He had been blind, caught in Jessica's charm and my own sonly loyalty. But gradually, he could no longer ignore the reality. He admitted that he had been naive, that he hadn't recognized the manipulation, and he began to understand the depth of the betrayal. There was a mixture of guilt and relief in his eyes, and I realized that part of this journey was not just about protecting myself, but about helping him regain his own clarity. As the authorities moved to secure the evidence and recover assets, I felt a profound sense of empowerment. It wasn't revenge in the petty sense. It was justice. I had taken steps to protect not only my home and my savings, but also to prevent others from being victimized in the same way. Knowing that my actions could prevent harm to other unsuspecting people gave me a renewed purpose. Walking through my home after the turmoil, I took time to reflect. The spaces that had once felt threatening now felt familiar again. My kitchen, my living room, the quiet corners of my house, all of it reminded me that I had reclaimed my life and my peace. There was still work to do, still conversations to have, still financial matters to settle. But the weight that had pressed on my shoulders for so long had lifted. I thought about the lessons embedded in this experience, the importance of vigilance, the value of trusting your instincts, and the necessity of standing up for yourself, even when it feels impossible. I realized that my strength had been underestimated, not just by Jessica, but by anyone who assumed that age or kindness would make me passive. And in proving otherwise, I discovered a resilience I had almost forgotten. As I looked at Daniel, sitting quietly beside me, I felt a mix of tenderness and pride. He was learning from the mistakes of the past, beginning to see the consequences of inaction, and slowly, we were rebuilding trust. Our relationship would never be exactly the same, but it was becoming honest, and in that honesty, I found comfort. Even as I acknowledged the satisfaction of justice, I knew that reflection was important. I thought about those who had been less fortunate, those who had not had the clarity or support to fight back. It strengthened my commitment to remain vigilant and to share my experience, hoping that others could learn from it. In those quiet moments, sipping tea in my garden, I felt a sense of closure mingled with renewed purpose. I was no longer simply a widow living quietly in her home. I was a woman who had faced deceit, danger, and betrayal, and had emerged with dignity intact. The journey had been long and difficult, but I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to protect my life, my family, and the principles I held dear. And in that peace, I knew I was ready for whatever came next, carrying both the lessons and the confidence I had earned through every challenge I had faced. Sitting in my garden, with a warm cup of tea in hand, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past months. The fear, the tension, the betrayal, it had all been real, and yet I had emerged stronger. I realized that courage isn't always about loud or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it's about quiet persistence, careful observation, and trusting your instincts even when no one else seems to. I thought about Daniel, my son, and how this experience had changed him too. He had been naive, caught in the web of manipulation, but he had seen the truth by the end. Watching him begin to understand the consequences of inaction reminded me that lessons learned through experience are the ones that last. It made me grateful that even in difficult moments, growth is possible for both yourself and those you love. I also thought about the other victims, people who hadn't had the chance to defend themselves, who had been swept into a network of deception and greed. It reminded me how important it is to stay vigilant and to use what we've learned to help others whenever possible. My story was not just about reclaiming my home or my finances. It was about awareness, preparation, and the quiet strength to stand up for yourself in the face of injustice. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over the garden, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had taken control of my life, defended my dignity, and, in the process, helped bring down a network that had been exploiting the vulnerable. The house that once felt foreign and threatening now felt like my sanctuary again. I was reminded that life can challenge us in ways we never anticipate, but it also gives us the chance to discover strengths we didn't know we had. I hope my story encourages anyone listening to trust themselves, to pay attention to the signs, and to never let fear or doubt take control. If something feels wrong, it probably is, and taking thoughtful, deliberate action can make all the difference. And so, I invite anyone who has faced betrayal, family tension, or toxic relationships to reflect, share, and speak up. Our experiences are powerful, and telling our stories can help others see that they are not alone. If my story resonated with you, consider liking, sharing, or commenting with your own experiences, because our voices, our wisdom, and our courage can inspire each other in ways we might never imagine.